Dragonkin the Banished is a new action RPG that just started its early access, and while it's still in the early stages of development and has a lot of planned improvements to go, one standout part of this game is the super customizable and unique skill system, the Ancestral Grid. The team reached out and requested a sponsored guide, and the way this game does skills is both its best and most complicated feature, so I thought perfect, let's take a look. The first thing to know is the skill system is itemized. You collect a variety of fragments and place them into the Ancestral Grid to determine what your skills are, how they function, and how they're improved. Fragments that are touching each other on this grid become linked, boosting each other as long as they're compatible. Fragments come in different hex sizes, effectively hard-linked fragment clusters ranging from 1 to 5 hexes. This is super important because the entire fragment cluster will share its effects with any other fragment cluster that it touches, even if they're just barely touching tips. This allows for some pretty insane combinations where every skill and its modifiers are sharing a bunch of bonuses with each other. It's pretty easy to spend a lot of time tinkering and optimizing with this, and when you get some new 5 hex legendary fragment drop, you just really want to stop immediately and see what it's got and think about redesigning your grid all over again. It's a tinkerer's paradise. There are 3 types of fragments to collect and use: character skills, Wyrmling skills, which are triggers, and modifiers. These different fragments can be mixed together into the very large and powerful hex clusters, or they can just be a single individual hex, which makes them flexible and easy to use. There's pros and cons to any size of fragment cluster, and each of them can be useful in the right board at any point in the game. So character skill fragments are your own personal, activatable skills. There's a few types of these, such as basic skills, which are simple free attacks and energy generators, core skills, which are your energy spenders and typically primary damage dealers, and utility skills, which are things like buffs and movement skills. Each of these can have a bunch of different other keywords, such as projectile and cooldown. These let you know what you can scale the skill with, and it's important for finding compatible fragments that they can link to. Don't hesitate to try a mixture of character skills. Your Ancestral Grid really doesn't need to be fully optimized at every step while you're progressing through the campaign, and even at early end game as well. A good skill with a couple relevant boosts can do some real work, and it helps to have an idea of what everything does that you have access to so that you can tinker with more complicated setups later. On my Barbarian run, I've found every skill to be pretty viable in the right setup as well. The Wyrmling skill fragments are triggered skills with an element that matches your chosen Wyrmling. This is the most fun part of the system, I think. You unlock a Wyrmling pretty early on in the game, and you can swap between several types from town, each with their own passive skills, triggerable Wyrmling skills that they can give you access to, and different elemental types. Wyrmling skills can be a variety of things, ranging from powerful damage dealing effects to defensive buffs and utility effects. Wyrmling skills aren't activated by you directly. Instead, they're attached to a compatible character skill, or even multiple compatible character skills, and are triggered by using that linked skill in some way. Remember those keywords on the character skills? Look for the matching compatibility keywords on the Wyrmling skill, and that shows you what they can support. Or you can just mouse over them. The actual trigger conditions for these are most commonly on use or on hit, but some of them do trigger on things like on kill, for example, or even there's some that are when a skill's duration expires. Just read the actual text to know more about how a specific Wyrmling skill triggers. Each of the 4 different Wyrmlings has a dozen or so of their own unique skills too, so there is plenty of these you can mix and match. You can have up to 5 character skills and also 5 Wyrmling skills total on your board at any one time. There's a biasing of the drops that you'll get to make it so that you'll get more fragments for the Wyrmling you currently have equipped, which is pretty helpful, but you will occasionally find some from the other different Wyrmling types so that you can, be tempted into experimenting with them and trying new builds and maybe swapping Wyrmlings on occasion to test things out. Wyrmlings have levels which allow you to invest in their skill trees for various fairly impactful buffs, both to you and your Wyrmling skills. Each Wyrmling does need to be leveled separately, but it's quite fast to catch one up later on due to the amount of XP that you get at higher levels. And aside from that, even a level 1 Wyrmling can actually use any Wyrmling skill. The only difference is the actual passives that you've unlocked. The Wyrmling you run, combined with the specific Wyrmling skills that you choose, and what skills you link them to, all make a huge difference in how your build plays. Even 2 builds with the same active character skills may function pretty differently depending on what Wyrmling skills you have equipped, and how attributes and your gear affect them. A Wyrmling skill that feels kind of unimpressive on one skill might actually be really powerful linked to a different one that triggers it better, or that shares a lot of the same keywords and therefore scaling options. And as you may have noticed, there are Modifier Fragments, the final piece of the puzzle. These allow you to do any number of things with skills to make them more powerful and useful in some way. There's basics like lowering cooldown of skills or scaling their damage, of course, but there's also more interesting mods too, like adding more projectiles, adding shockwaves that trigger on hit, or making skills multi-hit. And on top of that, later on you'll start to discover even more dramatic trade-off modifiers, such as basic skill enhancement, which turns a basic attack into a core skill, which is surprisingly effective. It adds an energy cost to the skill, but you still get the energy gain, and it's pretty easy to build around to be able to make it kind of go infinite in terms of energy costs. There's even an ultimate modifier, which makes a core skill much more powerful in every way, but adds a long cooldown. So Modifier Fragments can be linked to character skills and Wyrmling skills, and that's really important. You just match the compatibility on the modifier with the keywords on both of the different skills. So finding synergies between the two can be really good, such as adding an extra projectile to a character skill that triggers a projectile-based Wyrmling skill, which also benefits from the same modifier, so they both get an extra projectile. In this example here, I'm using Earthen Rage, a projectile skill, and Deadly Orb, also a projectile Wyrmling skill, and they're linked together, and both are benefiting from the bonus projectile mod in the Earthen cluster. Both skills are also touching a third fragment cluster, which includes the Reinforcements mod, which is applying to both of them, meaning that if either skill, the Wyrmling or the active skill, gets a kill, we get the bonus stacking HP. Just from this small example, you can see the almost limitless possibilities for satisfying layouts. Now, unique to Modifier Fragments is the fact that they can have rarities. Higher rarity fragments provide more power, represented by the lightning symbol here. Normal rarity only gives 1 power, uncommon 2, rare 3 power, and so on. In order to activate a modifier or make its effects more powerful in some way, any linked skills must reach a total mod power that matches one of the breakpoints. So if you mouse over a modifier fragment, it'll show you the various breakpoints that it can have, and you can actually mouse over the skill that is linked to it to find out how much total power you have currently and what the next breakpoint is. Defensive Stance modifier, for example, only needs 3 power and it's done. That's the only breakpoint that it has. So you just need 3 normal rarity defensive stance fragments linked to a skill in order for it to work, but that takes up 3 slots. Ideally, you'd want just 1 rare defensive stance mod, because that'd give you 3 power in a single slot and activate it just in that 1 hex. Really efficient. Many modifiers, like for example bonus projectiles, have multiple power breakpoints that you can aim for. Just 3 power, it's just pretty easy to get, gives you an extra projectile, so that's what you'll use most of the time. But if you can push and manage to get a whopping 15 power, you can actually get 2 extra projectiles, which could potentially be very, very powerful in certain skills. But because that's so much, unless you have some really nice high rarity clusters that include multiple projectile modifiers, it can be a little tough to do without making some sacrifices. And just as a tip, there is no advantage to going over a power level breakpoint. So if you get all the way to 13 power on bonus projectiles, it doesn't actually give you any extra benefit over just being 3. So just get yourself to a breakpoint and then use that space for other modifiers. Now, in addition to enhancing your character skills with Wyrmling skill triggers and all of these different modifiers, every character skill can be supercharged through a mechanic called Symbiosis. If you get a character skill linked to 8 or more compatible modifiers or Wyrmling skills, they both count, it'll be given extra damage, some cool new visual effects, and even some extra bonus mechanics in some cases. And on top of that, a Symbiosis skill also gets the keyword and matching damage type to your current Wyrmling. So Symbiosis is a pretty high priority for your main damage skill. It's a substantial damage boost, and it gives you more options for scaling damage further, so you really want to push for that on your main skill. It is nice to have Symbiosis on utility and basic skills, but it's really not essential, especially while progressing. Experiment though and see what Symbiosis does for different skills and see if it's worth going out of your way for. As a tip, there's target dummies in the training grounds that you can unlock in town later on. It comes with bonus XP, so it's pretty worth getting. It's great for testing things like this out. For example, I like the Symbiosis on the Survivor's Spirit kind of Warcry skill because it does a little bit of damage to everything in a large area, and this skill doesn't usually do damage, it adds damage to it. And that's really useful for blowing up things like poison sacks and destructibles, as well as just like aggroing all of the enemies in a wide area. Pretty handy. And if you're really struggling to try and get Symbiosis on multiple skills, just remember that as you expand your Ancestral Grid size and get larger clusters of compatible modifiers and more options and higher rarities, it gets much easier to Symbiosis multiple skills. You might end up doing it accidentally for several skills at once even. Damage scaling with Symbiosis skills is more flexible because they keep both their original damage type and keyword, and they gain the damage type and keyword of the Wyrmling that you have. So for example, if you Symbiosis your Ice type core skill, it also becomes a Lightning skill if you have the Lightning Wyrmling. Symbiosis skills like this, they'll automatically make use of your biggest elemental damage modifier, but only the biggest one. They aren't like added together, so make sure you invest in either one or the other. If you sometimes notice that a damage rune doesn't seem to do anything, it's probably because you already have a larger amount of the other damage type. So just focus on stacking the one that's currently higher. Symbiosis skills also target enemies' lowest resistances of the two types. Unless you're like lowering resistances or facing very specific enemy resistances, there's not much to do with that knowledge except say, oh cool, that's good. So now let's talk about how to make the most of your Wyrmling Trigger skills. Each of them has keywords and can be supported by Modifier Fragments just like your normal character skills. It's easy to neglect them, but you really shouldn't because for many builds, scaling Wyrmling skills can make a real difference. For example, on one of my Earthen Rage setups, which is a very high damage skill in its own right, the Electrifying Charge Wyrmling skill was actually doing more damage than the main skill that triggered it. And that was with very little modifier boosting. It was just such an incredibly efficient trigger setup. The basic option is, of course, just to increase the compatible damage type. So if it's a Lightning Wyrmling skill, put lightning damage on it and just benefit from some extra DPS. But look for other opportunities to do more creative things too. For example, bonus chance modifier scales the trigger chance of linked Wyrmling skills. You want to link it to the actual Wyrmling skill itself and not the character skill. If you're not kind of maxing out your trigger rate, then this can be extremely powerful. A really good thing to note as well is that damage over time triggers Wyrmling skills as well. So skills that leave a dot in addition to hitting can be very effective for triggering low or no cooldown Wyrmling skills as frequently as possible. Earthen Rage is a good example of this, linked to Electrify, which zaps a random enemy repeatedly. Earthen Rage can put out a lot of hits and stack a lot of long-lasting damage over time effects, and each tick of that damage over time can trigger Electrify to laser everything down. There's a really nice synergy here too, because Earthen Rage's biggest downside is its random targeting and missing enemies, which Electrify covers that gap quite well. So there's a nice synergy there. For this setup, in order to try and maximize things, I would and have done things like scale Earthen Rage to have more projectiles for more possible hits and lower its energy cost so that I can spam it as much as possible. Then I'd link Electrify to lightning damage for obvious reasons, and I'd test bonus chance to see if it resulted in more triggers. The training dummies and the DPS test tool on the left of the screen are both great for experimenting with things like this. Based on my testing with this setup, for example, it seems that the bonus chance doesn't make too much difference. Likely because I'm already hitting max trigger chance and I'm running up against some kind of internal cooldown. For this setup, to boost it even further though, in ways that aren't just raw damage, I'd also consider adding some kind of utility that I couldn't fit elsewhere. It gets plenty of kills, for example, so the Reinforcements modifier, which boosts max health, would be really good here. Additional Ancestral Grid hex slots make it much easier to position larger connected fragments and get more skills upgraded to Symbiosis, even with suboptimal fragment options. The majority of the hex slots are unlocked via character levels, a few at a time, in the listed level breakpoints. But also make sure you don't miss out on unlocking those bottom slots down at the tail of the dragon as well. Upgrading Pythia twice in town gives access to the bottom 6 hex slots in that tail section, and getting these unlocked ASAP is a huge boost as it makes it much easier to position like a primary skill kind of in the center of the grid and then upgrade it. It just gives you a lot more room to maneuver. So you're probably then wondering, how do I get town levels? Town XP is gained whenever you complete any quest, either in the campaign or at endgame via the hunting board. Chaos hunts at endgame also give you town XP too. You can, on top of that, get bonus town XP by finding the hidden chalices scattered around the world. They aren't shown on the map until after you've collected them. They're intended to be a sneaky little thing that you have to try and find. So look for the sparkles. Typically they're in cute little spots or kind of out of the way locations. So have some fun exploring around. You'll also get bonus town XP for activating the dragon scouting locations, and these are handy for exploring anyway and easy to spot, so you're going to want to do these either way. From speaking with the devs, there's also some hidden extra bonus ways of getting XP, like for example doing things with crafting. They mentioned they wanted people to figure out some of those things themselves though. Now, there's no question that a natural challenge of a deep and nuanced system like this is that managing all of these fragments can be quite tricky. But there are some good tools to help. You have 4 inventory screens where fragments go when looted. I like to use the later ones to store specific themes of small fragment clusters. Like for example, I put all my Wyrmling skills in the last tab. I also have a tab dedicated to single hexes, which is really space efficient and also really handy to have them all on one page when you're looking for kind of a gap filler. You'll want to keep the first tab or two somewhat clear if you can, so that you can loot that juicy big 5 hex legendary fragment that drops when you're in combat without having to like empty your inventory or something. Something that a lot of people actually miss, and I did until the devs told me about it, is this gloriously freeform and very messy floating fragment system. So you can actually place 50 fragment clusters around your ancestral grid for somewhat easy access. Everyone will use this system somewhat differently, with varying levels of chaos. I like to group my larger fragment clusters together by theme or use case in here. Like, for example, just having all of my projectile modifying fragments or my big 5 hex clusters just kind of all stacked on top of each other. And you can stack fragments on top of each other however you want in this free floating area, and then you can just kind of dig through your pile whenever you need some of whatever you've stacked there. And that's why it's a good idea to know what you're kind of putting where. That 50 limit is total fragment clusters as well, not like per hex. So if you really want to stretch the storage, I recommend putting all your 1 and 2 hex fragments in the normal storage trays and all of those giga fragments in the free floating area. Another little tip is you can tuck these clusters off screen to make it a bit neater and less hectic. The position is actually based on which part of the fragment you click, so you can get a little cute with this and tuck it right away. As for actually finding compatible skills and modifiers, it's best done with a combination of 2 different tools. The first and the one that you'll use the most is just mousing over the skill, which highlights automatically all compatible modifiers and Wyrmling skills. And then mousing over a modifier, conversely, shows all of the skills that it can support. This is the main way that I find what I'm looking for. And then when you're kind of not sure or want to find all of something in particular a bit easier, you can combine that with the top keyword search tool. Look at your skills and identify what keywords you're interested in, and then you can search for anything compatible by tagging all of the keywords and setting the toggle to at least 1 must match. That'll find literally anything that works with your current skill. If you want to narrow down something specific, then you can toggle to all must match and just use a couple or a single keyword that you know are on that modifier. Like Ultimate, for example, has Core and Instant. Not many things have that specific combo, so if you tag them both, I can find the Ultimate modifier very easily. Some modifiers do unfortunately only have like 1 keyword that's common, which makes it harder to find them this way, so you'll want to keep those sorted somewhere where you know where they are if you plan on using them a lot. And just as a quick word of warning, the keyword search tool may not be able to show you something that's tucked away off screen fully in the free floating area, so make sure you know what's there if you do use that method a lot. Large fragment clusters are extremely powerful, and they're kind of like the big juicy things that you'll want to go for, but it's really super helpful to actually keep just a nice bank, a collection of 1 and a couple 2 hex fragments that you can use as gap fillers, especially in rare and legendary rarities for those extra power level. You'll often just need like a bit more power to reach a certain breakpoint in a setup, or you'll have some weird hole left over on the edge somewhere, and these little fillers can be really handy to have, and it's good to have them all sorted in one place. So, you want more fragments? Of course you do. It's one of the primary motivating factors when playing this game, I feel, is like finding that new juicy 5 hex fragment or that single hex legendary one you're looking for. There are loot items, so the typical loot rules do apply here. Kill more monster, more fasterer. That's always going to get you more loot. But that said, there are a few specific things you can take advantage of here for fragments. At endgame, you have the opportunity to target farm in hunts. Hunt 5-3 unlocks you a fragments bonus loot for chaos hunts, Chaos Hunts are randomized endgame farming that you can do, and this lets you set the loot toggle for fragments so that you can target farm them. Hunt 8 too as well, behind that one, unlocks the augmentation to boost fragments. Augmentations are passive bonuses that you can choose between to boost all regular hunts and chaos hunts as well. So obviously this one is a really great one to aim for. However, it is worth noting that this one is late endgame as it requires doing Calamity 1 difficulty, which is the highest difficulty in the current version of the game. It's pretty spicy. Overall, fragments, especially good ones, drop from elites, bosses, and end of hunt chests more than anything else. So either focus on fast hunts for chests or higher difficulty elite farming. And finally, here is a short list of what I have found to be the most powerful modifiers. Of course, this is going to vary from build to build and from character to character, but I think these things are pretty shared across most builds and characters. Energy gain, which you can link to your core skill, can offset energy costs or even fully cover them in some cases. If you want to endlessly spin to win without needing a generator, a combination of energy gain fragments and then cost reduction on gear and fragments can get you there. Depending on the core skill, this is often one of your highest priority modifiers. Bonus projectiles, I've always found it handy to have a good variety of options for this, for adding to any sort of projectile setup builds both with Wyrmling skills and the actual character skills. Even though you do lose some per projectile damage, the total damage is generally higher, and it gives more coverage and better triggers, so bonus projectiles is really good. Reduced cooldown is mostly for utility skills, and being able to use those utility skills more often is really good, but on top of that, it can actually help you get things like near permanent uptime on some of the nice Wyrmling buffs, which otherwise might have big gaps in them. Just lowering that cooldown a bit kind of gets you better uptime and better coverage. The defensive stance modifier for any channeled skills especially, or any skills with just good uptime, is very solid. It's just a nice extra layer of defense. Really helps you push those higher difficulties. Double strike is pretty similar to bonus projectiles in that it kind of gives you more hits for the trade-off of less per hit damage. It's not something you want to use on every skill necessarily, but I really liked it on basic attacks. That multi-hit seems to help them work better as generators so that you can get back to using your core skill much more quickly, which is what you want to be doing. It's nice to only have to do 2 or 3 hits to fill up your energy. And then reinforcements. You 100% want this on some skill that kills groups of enemies for you. It can be your main skill or even just a Wyrmling Trigger. It stacks up to 100 times and it gives you a max HP boost for each stack that resets each zone or if you die, but it's a great survivability boost and I try to always have it active. So thanks to the Dragonkin team for reaching out for a sponsored video. I always love to see what devs are coming up with in the action RPG genre, especially when it's a new and creative idea like this skill system. The game is available in early access now with a roadmap detailing the plans through till next autumn, and it's planned to be on PS5, Xbox and PC at 1.0 launch, with just PC available for the moment. It's actually got both WASD and click-to-move controls and multiple options for viewing angle and distance too. The devs have said there's no plans for microtransactions here. This is more of a traditional box price action RPG, which I know some of you prefer to have in amongst your many live service games that try to hog your attention. I learned a lot of other details about the game in the process of making this guide that just don't kind of fit here, so if you have any questions about it, feel free to hit me up in the comments below and I'll let you know what I know. But that's it for now. I'm Ziggy D, and thanks for watching.